first one for this afternoon. We are going to talk about product, and probably with this whole event, one of the themes that we wanted to kind of pull out, and also one of the reasons we actually decided to run the event all together, was we actually feel like in Auckland and in New Zealand we don't talk enough about the success of the music tech industry that we've actually created here in the last 20 years. And we don't, and often unless people are directly connected to the industry or have some other relationship with it, no one actually realizes that we have this cluster of amazing music tech businesses that have grown up and around the Rodi area and have had a lot of kind of intersections and crossovers and people who have been involved in different aspects of all of those businesses as they've grown. And they're out there dominating. They are, really taking it to the world, and they're one of the high-tech success stories that we just don't talk about enough, and it's something that we wanted to draw a kind of a connection with this whole event. It's a little bit of a showcase and a celebration, and we also just wanted to highlight there's actually a lot of overlap and intersection with the nighttime economy as well. So we're in a music venue here, neck of the woods, which we're emerging out of the challenges of the pandemic. But a lot of the people who are actually working in these music tech businesses in the Rodi area are actually musicians and artists and DJs and performers in their own right who play in our venue every weekend, and others like us around Rodi and the city. And it's something we should celebrate. So there's this connection between the creativity and innovation that people are showing in their artistic endeavours at night, and that's flowing into their daytime jobs where they are building these really interesting tech products. So let's get into it. So let me introduce our panellists for today. So we have got, at the far end there, we've got Matt Cleland, who's with product from InMusic. We've got Rodi Kirk, who is heading up product and education for Melodics. We've got Emma Pittar, who is the head of experience at Serato, and Dylan Wood, who's head of sound at Ableton. And so I thought we'd kick this off with just a little bit of we'll get everyone just to maybe introduce themselves a little bit, because we're going to talk first off about a little bit about everyone's backgrounds, and we're going to talk a little bit about the companies and some of the philosophies and approaches to products. But I think it's a really interesting conversation just to hear a little bit about everyone's backstories. They've got very interesting personal backgrounds as well about how they've kind of ended up in the roles they are and their connection in the music space, and it will just add a little colour and kind of character to our conversation today. So can start with Matt, lucky last at the end there.
G'day everyone, my name's Matt. I am the product officer at InMusic, which is a strange term and I don't know what it is either. I started music journey, I guess, when I destroyed my dad's turntable scratching the Beatles' White Album until I broke the belt drive and I had to go and replace the belt at the age of 12, I guess. And so I discovered that everything is expensive in the music world, and so I started my journey of buying vinyl, buying belts and buying turntables quite young. I started promoting gigs about 14 years old, moved into music production about 15, and then slowly sort of got more heavily into sort of that side of the music world. Over time I started a record label when I was about 18, started residencies at clubs, moved into bigger scale productions, and then eventually moved into owning a record store. So quite a wide background before I even sort of looked at software. But it sort of gave me a bit of an edge, I think, allowed me to sort of understand all the different facets of what I was doing. So when I started at Serato 2009, I already knew quite a lot of why we were doing what we were doing and just what it meant to people sort of on the front line. So quite a lot of really good experience there before I even stepped foot into the wonderful world of Serato. And then from there it was just basically learning every day, all day, from all these wonderful people around me, and just the opportunities and the mentors, some of whom are here, including Dylan, who pretty much gave me my first job. Thanks, Dylan. So yeah, pretty fun, exciting entrance to the world of music software and music technology.
Yeah, awesome. I remember when I first met you, we talked about, does anyone ever remember, was it Slipstream? Yeah, on George back in the day. Matt Drake did one of the original kind of techno kind of radio shows that I discovered when I was much, much younger, and I was the biggest fanboy when I first met you. So it's just really interesting, those crossovers. Yeah, thanks, Matt. So, Rodi, a little bit about you as well.
Okay. Yes. Hi. My name's Rodi, and I think that the way I think about the sort of my trajectory and the stuff I'm interested in so far is the overlap of these three circles in a Venn of music and education and technology, and I kind of started out really just focused on the music one because that was the most interesting, and it was such a cool way as a young person to kind of expand the circle of people I was hanging out with. I think that's still one of the most sort of powerful things about music is it's a real good forcing function for meeting people, for finding out about, for having sort of new experiences. And so I kind of made my way into music through radio and through DJing, and from then into producing music with others and releasing music, while all sort of performing as a DJ, both on radio and in nightclubs and festivals and things like that. Collaborating with other people as a music producer, sort of doing hip hop music, writing beats, but also really pushing myself to work with a lot of other different acts as well. So I could, learning's a really big driver for me. And so after a certain point, most of this I was doing in New Zealand and around K Road and around this sort of scene anyhow. And then in my mid to late 20s, my wife and I packed up and moved over to Europe for a while, and I took a pretty hard change in career trajectory. I was not really that interested in just DJing for a living over there in a new city and meeting new people. I thought I would get into composing and producing music for film, but it turns out that's actually a really hard thing to just decide you want to do and get into. And so instead, I got into lecturing and got into education and teaching undergrad papers in musicology and music technology. And I kind of just had a little bit of luck, really. The paper that I ran, I called it technomusicology, and the idea was that you like you would with ethnomusicology, look at society and culture through the lens of music and how that's sort of changed and influenced things over time. I decided to take that lens through technology, but really I think just because I was teaching this course in Berlin and it had techno in the title, it was super popular. And so they were like, oh, this guy really must know what he's doing in education. And from there, I kind of got an introduction to like a lot of the local music tech companies that were based in Berlin, and got more interested in the technologies side. And from there, found my way more and more into helping bring those ideas around education and music together in a technology product, which ended up being Melodics, which I'll talk a little bit more about later.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Rory. And Emma, for you've taken a slightly different career trajectory, right, with your role at Serato. So can you hear a bit about that?
Okay, cool. Thanks, Rodi. So, hi, I'm Emma. I'm going to leverage your Venn diagram.
Sure. Yeah.
But I'm going to swap out the education and pop in design and UX. So I guess my main thing is that I'm a design and UX nerd who kind of I really developed my skills when I went over to London and learned about what UX was in the kind of beginning days. But at night I was also working in bars and working for the Big Chill Festival. So I always had this kind of these two parts, the love of the music and the scene and the culture, but also really getting real nerdy into making things and designing software. I came back to New Zealand and worked on big government projects and on for Microsoft implementations, but still I'm really developing those skills around research and technology and building software. But also loving going out to the gigs and occasionally moonlighting as a door girl at different venues. And I also put on a conference called UX Homegrown, where we would get all of our local UX talent to come and tell us about what they were doing, how they were doing it, so that we could learn from each other. And it was through that process that I started touching base a lot with Phil Cockrell, who worked at Serato, and kind of getting a real good insight into how they were doing things. And then the opportunity kind of came up where they needed someone to come in and help them out. So I started off as a contractor in 2016 at Serato. And after 6 months, I said to them, what am I going to do with all this audio technology knowledge in my head now? I don't know if I can transfer that to anything else. And so I've been there ever since, running the... and so now I'm just running the product design team and the UX guys.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and Dylan, lucky last. The original kind of hard out music nerd, probably, I think is the right description, right?
Original hard out. So, yeah, that does. Not sure if that sounds like me. I guess I've always been into music and making stuff. So I sort of got into probably guitar and computers around the same time when I was 14. And grew up playing in bands and playing heavy metal and rock and stuff like that. And kind of met, it's interesting, you meet all these people along the way, and half of those people I still know or work with. Who would have known that the hairy, loud guitar player in my punk band when I was 19 was the IT guy at Serato for some 5 years or something when I worked there. So so I was always into making things. I played in bands, toured a bit, worked at the rock shop ran the digital department for quite a while. Always sort of in and out of bands and projects and music. Toured as a guitar tech for a while. I got into doing commercial music production for short films mostly, and television ads and stuff like that. And that was actually how I sort of took my connection, and I did some IT work along the way. I've done all sorts of different things, and they sort of all connected together to meeting Sam from Serato by figuring out how to author the first promotional DVD for Scratch Live. It's like, we need someone to author a DVD. I don't know how to do that, but I'm sure I can figure it out. It involves a computer. So that was lots of sleeping on a couch waiting for a G4 to render a DVD, which was not very exciting. But that was around 2007. I had done some contract work for Serato and joined in 2007. Did lots of different stuff there, from support team, QA, testing, product, project management, all sort of different aspects of it while the company was growing. I think it was 19 people when I joined and 80 or 90 when I left, something like that. And moved to work for Ableton in 2013. And so had been doing a lot of hardware products at Serato, and then one of the first big projects I did at Ableton was the Push 2 release. So I was really heavily involved in the development of all the sampling workflows for Push 2 and a bunch of live releases and stuff. And my role, I moved back home in 2018, and I've been working remotely since. And my role is head of sound. So my team is the team that builds all the effects and instruments and sound libraries and stuff like that. So I've kind of stuck with making things and music are the two things I like, and that's probably been the thread through all of the different stuff that's connected together, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, thanks. It's a really interesting cross-section, and overlapping experiences, and it's some great backstories there, actually. So what we want to talk about now is probably the products themselves, right? Because across all of the companies that you're involved with, there's quite a wide range of products and quite a wide range of sort of user segments and customers that you're targeting with what's been great, and a mix of hardware and software as well. So probably the easiest one, not possibly the easiest one, but the one that's perhaps the most well known to people probably is, I guess, Serato. It's obviously been around the longest in New Zealand. It's the leader in the DJ software space. But maybe, Emma, do you just want to talk about sort of quickly the flagship products? Obviously Serato DJ, Serato Studio, just touch on those and give people an overview if they're not familiar.
Yeah, cool. I mean, there's lots of people here who have worked at Serato, but for those that haven't, so we've got our flagship product is Serato DJ, and we've got millions of users around the world who are using that. And so that's been around, maybe 20 years-ish? Yeah. 22. Yeah. And so that's something that's very much part of American culture. And so that's where our biggest audience is. And very much part of that kind of open format, top 40 hip-hop culture as well. So you've got, Kanye rapping about it, and all the big guys that they're using it. And so then we've got our kind of, in the last couple of years, we've been developing some products for music producers. And what we were doing is kind of leveraging our kind of core user base and looking at their challenges around, how else might they want to add strings to their bow. And so we looked at, creating a tool for helping our DJs make beats is kind of where we started. And so that's where the kind of genesis of Studio came around. And so Studio is our music production tool, which we launched a couple of years ago. And then we've also got a plugin called Sample, which is for our hip hop producers sampling workflows, which is more for your kind of pro producer rather than our beginners. So sorry, roundabout way. So we've kind of got DJ tools and music production tools, and we've kind of got a main focus area around that North American market.
Yeah, awesome, thanks. And I guess, Dylan, that's a nice segue because we've got sort of Serato Studio, which is in the production side, but I guess Ableton Live then is obviously renowned globally as the big production, production and sort of live performance software. And
I guess I actually used to sell Ableton Live when it first came out, version 1.0 in 2000 or something like that. And it was this weird sort of tool for electronic loops at the time. It was not such a mainstream thing, and I think over years it's become really central to creative music makers, maybe more so than people that are doing like what you might do with Pro Tools, like recording a band is still quite. If you're doing stuff more like a tape machine, I think there's tools that people use that way. But for people that sort of want to make the technology and the workflow sort of all mesh together in the way that they make music. So, recording guitars, but also sampling them, chopping them up, doing stuff with them that you might not do if you were a traditional sort of band. So a lot of that sort of creative production stuff there's quite a lot of really deep, complex workflows in Ableton Live. And I think we've got also millions of people around the world using it. It's pretty deep and pretty complicated, stupidly complicated in some places, and there's a lot to learn. But I think a lot of people use it's a pretty what am I trying to say? It's a complex tool that can do a lot of things, and it means a lot of people use it in a lot of different ways. Some people DJ with it. I've never DJed with it because I don't like it doing that, but I'd prefer to do something with my hands. But it can kind of do so many things that lots of different people use it in really different ways. Its core background came from live performance, like performing live as you're making music on stage, but it keeps that nature of the flow, that kind of feeling of flow when you're performing live. You can kind of make music like that once you get into it. And so that's the main product Ableton makes. Head office is in Berlin. We've got people all around the world though. So many of us know Aotearoa as well. She's looks after the New Zealand territory. She's based in Australia, and we've got people there. My team's all in Berlin because I work on the product side of things. But Ableton also makes hardware. We make Push, which is it's like not a keyboard basically. It's a square thing that you play keyboard on, if that makes sense. But it's like it's designed to. But kind of like the controllers for Serato, it's like a way to do it with your hands instead of with a mouse, so you can make music with your hands. But we also do, we have a learning music website and a learning synthesis website where we teach really fundamental aspects of music making and synthesis. And we have an educational program as well, which is it's called Ableton for the Classroom, and that is about providing resources to teachers that want to teach people digital music making and stuff as well. So yeah, started at the sort of product pro end, and a lot of stuff that we're working on now is also about sort of educating and empowering people to learn how to make music, because it's not that easy actually. Yeah, nice. And actually that education theme is quite a big one that comes through, I think, in a lot of the product side, which is a nice intro into Rodi, I think, in talking about Melodics and what you've been doing there in the product space.
Yeah, sure. So Melodics is a product that helps people learn to play musical instruments. So we're really focused on the beginning of people's musical journeys, really, or with a particular instrument. So what our software does is simply will listen to you playing and give you immediate feedback on your timing and accuracy. And we kind of have these two main product pillars we think about. One of them is guided learning. You have to actually be able to learn things in the interactive way. And the other one is motivational mechanics. It needs to actually be fun, because the thing about practicing an instrument is that it just takes a lot of time, and often it feels like a bit of a slog. And so a lot of our effort is focused on using these kind of core education methodologies that we know work, and being able to break things down into component parts which are really achievable within a single session, and then put those smaller parts together in bigger and bigger chunks over time to build a great result and build confidence in learning how to play an instrument.
Yeah, awesome. And we're actually going to have a couple of stations set up later on in the afternoon, so people can actually have a play on the software and actually take it for a spin. Yeah, go for a drive.
Yeah, I mean, one other point to add to it, which is it's actually really relevant to everyone else on this panel discussion, is that the instruments we support are all electronic instruments. So it's not acoustic instruments like guitar and things like that. They're instruments that you would take and plug into a computer or an iPad, and we're listening for this information via MIDI, which is a digital interface for musical information. And that means we support teaching non-traditional instruments like Ableton Push, or like being able to teach, build up rhythmic fundamental skills for DJs through finger drumming using their DJ mixer or controller, or a whole suite of InMusic instruments around, from keyboards to drum kits to pad controllers as well.
Yeah, awesome. And that brings us to Matt, actually, with InMusic. So InMusic are probably the brand name that's the least familiar, I guess, to people, but it's got quite a big umbrella, right? You should probably give us the overview on.
Cool. InMusic is a company that's founded by Jack O'Donnell. He purchased a little DJ company called Newmark many moons ago. And over time, he's sort of acquired more and more music technology companies under his umbrella. So Alesis, Akai, Denon, Rain. We've got Newmark, of course. There's a whole slew of them, and part of the sort of ethos of InMusic has been to sort of integrate technology stacks from one business to another and workflows from one business to another. So really about buying IP and sort of seeing what that can be melded into other parts of the organization. So that's really where I sort of came in. Jack has partnered with Serato for many years, and over that time formed a really strong relationship. For Jack builds the hardware and Serato builds the software, and so there was very little in-house experience with the sort of software stack. So over time they were sort of looking at building a more integrated DJ experience, so a standalone controller rather than using a laptop. And within that came a huge amount of complexity that the business wasn't able to sort of understand very easily. So came along and sort of helped understand what that integration looked like, what the workflows of people were, how the different brands would integrate with those workflows, and how the software could sort of be built in a way that delivered value to the users quickly. So it's been quite a journey. At the moment, we're struggling with manufacturing enough. I think like a lot of hardware companies, there's a lot of chip shortages and stuff around the world. So it's been a great first couple of years of the pandemic, and then things are sort of slowly ground to a halt in terms of production, which is more difficult for hardware companies than software companies. But it's something that we'll have to sort of live with a little bit at the moment.
Yeah, that's really interesting, actually. And so I guess this is a good kind of point to kind of jump into a little bit about what it's like being a company that's building global products from New Zealand, because I think you've got a lot of kind of common themes in terms of how you're approaching product, but you've got quite different businesses behind it. Like, so with InMusic, it's sort of a subsidiary here in New Zealand of a much bigger global company. Melodics is very much that sort of coming through that traditional startup kind of journey starting out as a music tech kind of education product. Serato's been established for 20 years, but is that homegrown success story. And then for Dylan, you're working remotely for Ableton, which is, got a global market, but headquartered in Berlin. So kind of what's it like building products for a global music audience from New Zealand? And how does that look for you guys?
I think one interesting observation I would make, having worked in New Zealand making products and working in Europe making products, is when you live and work in New Zealand and you're making stuff that you're making, that you're not going to make money selling your products just in the New Zealand market. You're going to sell them globally because you have to, That's not always true if you start in a big market, because you might just be really popular in France or something, you know. So that's one aspect. But then the other thing that you assume when you work in New Zealand is like, I just kind of assume everyone else in the world is not like us, because we're this weird little island in the bottom of the world, and everything about our country is quite starkly different to most other places that you go. So when you're thinking about building stuff for people, my assumption always is, well, people in America or Europe or Japan or other places, they are obviously really think and work really differently to us. The flip side is when you are somewhere big, it's much easier to assume that people are more like you. So if you're a Berlin-based tech company making stuff, there's a much bigger echo chamber. Oh, well, we talked to all of our friends in Berlin and they all really like what we've made, so it's going to be like that. So you've got this big echo chamber, whereas I don't think that echo chamber exists in the same way in New Zealand, because you just assume you assume you need to talk to people elsewhere. If that makes sense.
And so what about for you, Emma? You mentioned before the US market's obviously such a big one for Serato, but how does that work for Serato building products from here?
Yeah. I really like the way that you put that, Dylan. That was really interesting. It's the beginner mindset, right, where you'll kind of set out to kind of find out what do people need, what are their workflows, what are the environments like that they're going to be using this thing in. And so before the pandemic, we would go over to America pretty regularly. And we've also got what we call studios in New York and LA, and also in London as well. And so those are really great bases for us that we can, whenever we go over there, we can go visit with the studios. And we've got our artist relation guys who are very much kind of like, high tier support. And they will bring artists through and DJs and producers and stuff that we can like talk to and interview and understand their workflows. And so those were really great hubs for us to be able to do that. And then the old pandemic hit and there was no more travelling. But one of the kind of bright things that came out of that was that everybody got skilled up on how to do a Zoom call or be in a Teams meeting, which was not necessarily the case before. And so we could really kind of supercharge our research. We do quite a lot of research. Each year we do quite a few big surveys where we have really rich profiles of our users and how they do things, and that helps us to recruit people who are quite specific when we're looking at doing particular feature development. We also have like beta forums as well, where we have kind of pro users where we're testing out early developed features, and these are people that are just based all over the world, and we're all just talking to them through the forums, or we're jumping on video calls with them, and kind of building really rich prototypes which we can serve over the internet now, because most people have got really good internet, and do user testing and research and just chatting to them and seeing what they're up to. So lots of times on video calls at funny times of the day and night.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I think probably for people outside of Serato and maybe the industry, we're familiar with, you have a lot, and probably not just Serato, but Ableton and InMusic as well, and even Melodics with the artists who you feature in the lessons. You have a lot of high-profile DJs and performers who are often the sort of the showcase side of the spectrum. But it sounds like from what you were saying, Emma, you have this ability now to kind of plug into your other part of the customer base when you're trying to figure out what the product design looks like? Yeah.
So there's, I guess in sort of design processes, you talk about the extreme users. So those are the people that are kind of using things in really innovative ways to achieve things. And they're always really interesting to watch, to see how you can kind of break down their workflows and then kind of help other people to achieve that goal. So we definitely have those kinds of people that we look to. But yeah, the working DJ who makes up like the bigger proportion of our user base, and also the hobbyist DJ as well. Having access to those guys that are going to be playing at like Dave & Buster's this weekend, kind of being able to chat to them has been amazing for our team, to build their empathy. And we've had new people start over the last 2 years, maybe in the product team or whatever, and so now they can just chat to these guys without having to go over to America.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, and so for Matt with InMusic, is that how do you guys approach it from your side with that kind of thing?
I guess because we've got so many offices around the world, we've got a slightly more complex way of doing business. So we've got quite a few brands and brand offices around the world. So we've got offices in Cambridge, UK. We've got offices in London, offices in Bremen and Germany. Tokyo, but based out of Rhode Island is our HQ. So we've got quite a few places that have product people in them. And so they each have those little sort of echo chambers. And so combining those echo chambers into one allows us to make sort of global decisions. So it sort of, we can use both the data points to make those decisions, as well as those sort of anecdotal things that sort of allow us to capture early parts of scenes sort of arising that we wouldn't necessarily see if they were invisible to us. But also allows us to sort of get on that hype train and sort of get those young artists coming through who are cool and doing cool things.
Yeah, awesome. And does that all funnel through to you guys here in New Zealand, and you kind of filter that and try and figure out what that looks like in terms of the product roadmap, or is that how do you guys kind of handle that?
A bit of that, yeah. I mean, a lot of it's filtering, a lot of it's understanding what is useless data, and a lot of it's just realizing that some data in general is just useless. So, you know, there's a lot of things that you can use to make a great decision. So surveys, talking to people, and then there's just gut instinct, which you sort of build up over time. Working in the industry, failing in the industry is really good as well. You sort of see what doesn't work, and sort of exactly where the boundary is between what is a good idea and what might be a risky idea. So yeah.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, and for Rodi and for Dylan, I know you both have obviously talked about the education side of things a couple of times already in the conversation here. And you know, Dylan, you're thinking about education probably because it's quite the butty, sophisticated product to kind of figure out Ableton Live, I guess, with all of the depth that's in it. And then Rodi, you're figuring out how do you get people kind of engaged and starting on that musical journey. I noticed you talk a lot about flow as well. Did you want to touch on sort of, that feels like that's a philosophy you're quite passionate about, that flow and learning kind of state that people get into?
Flow and music kind of go hand in hand. It's sort of the classic example. Sort of what flow is. In the 90s, a Hungarian guy by the name of Mihai Csikszentmihalyi sort of went and did this. Just went and did this study. I think what makes people happy. I think being Eastern European, I think he called it something like what makes life worth living, or something similar to that. But the idea was he did this really longitudinal study across the 90s, and they sort of came back with this fascinating insight: is that people are at their happiest when they're engaged in an activity where the level of challenge of that activity meets their ability at an appropriate level. It kind of doesn't matter what it is. Could be skiing, surfing, reading, writing, playing music, listening to music. What's going to really matter is that for you as the individual, your sort of level of ability in that activity matches the level of difficulty of something that you're looking for. And the best way to view this is sort of as a flow channel. So off on one side, if your ability vastly outmatches what you're trying to do. If you're a super snowboarder and you're going down the easy slope, it's just going to be simply boring, and you'll drop out and not be interested in that. And conversely, if you're like me, trying to go down the super tricky slope, you're just going to be totally anxious and not have a good time. And somewhere in the middle is that flow zone layer where you're at that sort of sweet spot of challenge and ability. And what happens in that spot is something that's probably really familiar to everyone in this room. It's they call an autotelic effect, what that means is that it feels like time just simply kind of fades away, and you kind of look up and you're like, oh, whoa, what have I just been zoning out or doing this thing for so long? And my point with that is that sort of seeking of a flow state is probably the most powerful motivator in somebody's intrinsic motivation to learn something. So the quicker you can get somebody in that flow state, the more they're going to be self-motivated to kind of keep on with a learning journey. And what's really powerful about that is that it's different for everybody, and it just changes over time. Like that idea of needing to sort of meet at those 2 points in the flow channel, that doesn't really change. Just where that is for you at any given time changes, which is why you can have those flow experiences. Let's just say using something like Live on your first day as a beginner, because you'd be like, wow, I click a thing and it just makes a sound, and that sounds amazing. maybe that's what it is there, and then all the way through to when you're doing very complex pieces of music collaboratively, maybe just you're still in that flow state, just the level of challenge has changed a lot for you. And I just think that's a really powerful core idea. It's something that we think a lot about at Melodics, and I think anyone working in education implicitly thinks a lot about that.
Yeah, I think the notion of flow is something we talk about a lot as well, because you sort of want to lose yourself in it and not be. Don't make me. I tend to think of when I don't want to have to think, because I want to be in a state where I'm not actively having to think. I'm doing something and enjoying it because I'm losing myself in it. I guess you talked a bit before about the education. I guess we see the learning of music making as something that it's a kind of a lifelong journey. Basically, to be a musician, you can that the level of ability and the challenges therein is like kind of endless. And you see people from our learning music stuff is kind of right at the end of, like, if you don't know anything about music and you want to understand what the beats in a bar mean and that kind of stuff, you can start there. And then we also have resources and material to sort of teach people that are trying to learn how to do DSP programming because they want to build their own devices, because it's clearly not possible to make music satisfactorily unless you build your own things to make it with. But we have those extremes of people that we're trying to teach, I think. And I think to what Emma said, the idea of extreme users, you sort of, I just wanted to connect actually what Matt said and what Emma said. So you talked about extreme users, the people at the far end, like Robert Henke, who's one of the, he and Gerhardt, who founded Ableton, built the first version of Live for their live performances as Mono Lake. And Robert's been involved and not involved in the company over years, but he now builds laser shows, and where the audio is the programming for the lasers and it's all built in Mac. It's ridiculous. He's at this extreme end, and you have people just learning out. And I guess you learn a lot by looking at both of those people, because if you build something just for the people at that end, it's going to be really off-putting to the people at the other end, and vice versa. So you can't dumb it down and you can't make it too hard. You have to sort of find a way to have progressive disclosure or elegance of design in such a way that you can offer something with depth that is approachable for someone that is not already an expert. But to what Matt said with the hunch and the gut thing, we have a lot of musicians at the company, so we do a lot of research and formal design as well, and we do a lot on intuition at the same time. But you have to validate it, or you mess it up. You have to test it. It's just I've got this idea, I think it will be great, and then you build it and then you test it on someone, and they're like, I don't understand it or what it is, and I don't want it, and you're like, oh, damn. But you sort of have to. So the instinct is a really. You can get a long way on gut and instinct and shortcut the amount of work taken to come to a solution. But with being able to validate with different kinds of users is just super important. And so that would be we're having a wide range of people with different skill levels and different backgrounds and experiences to talk with and interact. We have similar groups of people that we test with around the world, and it's getting a diverse and wide enough lens on what you're doing so that you can make something that appeals to a wide number of people, rather than making something that fits perfectly for this one small group or this particular approach.
And so I think there's you obviously have a lot of similar kind of approaches and thinking around, how you're developing your various products. But given we're all kind of in this little grouping in New Zealand, right on the other side of the world from everyone else, and a lot of you have known each other over the years because you've either worked together at Serato previously or perhaps kind of moved around different companies and had connections through the music space as well. How much do you get an opportunity to talk about product with each other? Is there much sort of knowledge sharing? How does that work between you all, or is there much of that happens, or is it a fairly independent kind of process for everybody?
If you've got an NDA, we can write.
Yep, we're all good.
I mean, there's a lot of crossover, but there's also competition still, I think, at the end of the day. So at Essence, we can only go so far together, I think. But on the flip side, every time we sort of meet up, we talk shop, and there's always opportunities to sort of cross-pollinate ideas. But just simply being around each other is great. Just the fact that we're, a stone's throw away from Serato makes just the sort of the synergy of having these organisations within spitting distance from each other really good. Going for lunch with people that you from different companies, you won't talk about work, but you'll talk about stuff that excites you, which might then feed into your work. So I think there's multiple opportunities there beyond just the sort of simple day-to-day work, and also opportunities with we work closely with Serato InMusic. That's not going to change. It's a great relationship and it makes us both a lot of money, so we're not going to change that. But there's opportunities with organisations such as Melodics that we can always enhance upon, and so those opportunities will always bear fruit, and I think will grow stronger over time as we do more and more.
Yeah, and I think for Dylan, I know occasionally with you remote working here, you sometimes have worked from the Melodics office periodically, right, and just for a bit of interaction with people. And do you find that connection useful for you? Or?
Yes, I'm completely useless at leaving the house. So this is the first time I've been out of the house this week, I think, maybe. Not sure, actually can't remember. So I do really enjoy having a chance to connect with the people, and a lot of the people in the different companies have either, many of the people you talk to have worked somewhere else before, or through some other connection, or there's just, the industry here is, the place is so small that you do tend to know everyone in some way. So it's always nice to catch up with people and talk about. I'm really crap at it, to be honest, in terms of profession, turning up and talking about stuff with people. I'm like, then I'd have to go somewhere. And it's just, and I think since COVID's happened, it's that's just clearly too difficult. But yeah, I used to work from the Melodics office, and I think it's always, I'm getting old and useless. So, the number of occasions that you all meet up with everyone is less now than it probably was when I was a bit younger, but it's always, everyone's got a common background, whether it's the product stuff or something adjacent to that. Most of the people doing this are interested in music and creativity, and making musical products is also a creative process. And so there's always something to talk. I really end up talking about the details of UX design approach or something, because I just don't have those conversations, but it's always something connected to that, I think, is the thing I find.
Yeah. Awesome. I'm keeping an eye on our time. We are gonna have a little bit of audience Q&A just at the end, but I did want to ask probably the $1 million question of all of you without getting anyone to breach any confidentiality. But I guess it would be nice to hear, with your product hats on, the crystal ball of what do you think the big kind of opportunities are in the music tech industry in your relative kind of segments over the next couple of years? What are you really excited about? Where do you think we could go, and what should we all be looking out for as users, right? Matt, go.
Okay.
What are you making, Matt?
Yeah,
diagram, please.
Venn diagram. Integrated experiences, I think, is sort of for us really the thing. There's a lot of different technology stacks that are now able to open up and talk to each other through APIs, and so it allows companies and organizations to build sort of part of the tool set that you might need, integrate it with another organization, and slowly over time these interfaces will sort of become a little bit more universal. And so as sort of we progress, you won't necessarily need to build something, someone else might build it for you, and you just lean on them and just license it from them. So the opportunities allow us to sort of build faster, and rather than having sort of 5 companies build the same thing, you might have one company build something that everyone licenses it from. So it just allows resource to be spent on other things and more creative things. So there's a lot of boring stuff that companies have to build and maintain, and the less of that is the more cool stuff is built. So
yeah, nice. Yeah, and what about you, Rodi? What do you think?
I can kind of add on to that. Really, it's these kind of integrated experiences where for the end customer, it's there may be a lot of different companies sort of talking to each other, and a lot of hardware compatibility and software work that has to be done. But really, for the end user, it shouldn't really be obvious. It should just kind of feel magic and all plug in seamlessly together and be part of the same sort of experience of musicking, and making that as easy as possible for people.
Yeah. Nice one. Emma, I know the boss is in the front row, so you have to be a little bit careful, but yeah.
Tell us what Young's making.
VR? No, I'm not going to talk about that. Okay, well, actually, I'm going to talk about this type of user that we're starting to see come through, which is kind of, I call them the polymath, But what they are is they're kids that are coming through who want to be creative directors. They don't want to be just music producers or just fashion designers or just artists, because what the software is doing now is it's taking away all the boring lead work and setup, and it's helping you get into the flow state much quicker, so you can create on multiple platforms and do lots of different types of expression. And so I think it's something around just that kind of unlimited creativity and integrated experiences for the user so that they can make lots of cool stuff.
Nice. Awesome. And Dylan, Ableton, what do you reckon?
I guess one of the sort of, I think it's a big challenge actually, and it's going to be one that's really important, is that computers are kind of still robots when it comes to music making. And by that I mean, like, Western music theory is all about, let's take all of the music in the world and turn it into a grid of pitches that are all exactly tuned the same, which is not how music exists in the world. Historically, different countries had different fundamental notes for their tuning systems. The number of notes and scales and ratios was all over the place, and the same is completely true for rhythm as well. Like, rhythm is not a spreadsheet, and most programs and music making tools are still very much rooted in the basis of, like, well, you have, the really early ones, it was like, well, it has 16 steps and they just play one after the other perfectly in time. And so the only place you can put drums is one of those 16 places. And that's not how rhythm works or how drummers play. But that DNA is still in music production and creation. I think a lot of the technological boundaries are gone, but the boundaries of all the stuff you have to do to humanize production or make stuff that feels like a person is making it instead of a computer making it. There's still a ton of really interesting challenges in there, because to make that seamless and magic is quite hard. I think I'd expect we see a lot of good stuff with music analysis and deep learning to figure out those, to take a piece of music that's not robotic and help you manipulate it as if it was just a sequence or a piece of data. Well, I think there's interesting things there. And I think one of the other big challenges is that mobile first kids is going to be kind of interesting. Like, my kids can do all sorts of stuff on their phones and iPads. It's like, and then I'm like, cool, you want to use Ableton? Great. They're like, what's a file? And you're like, right, let me, okay, so hang on. Do you know what a hard disk is? No. Okay. So I think the other challenge that we have in parallel is we've built up all this amazing stuff. For Ableton in particular, like, our program is super deep and it relies on the laptop world. And that world is moving away. It abstracts a lot of the complexity away, and I guess, which is amazing. And hopefully we can abstract away as much of the complexity as possible. But I think getting younger people to engage with the complexity necessary will be challenging, because it's less part of their world than it was at a point in time in the past.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So, in short, you're going to be busy, right? It's going to be a busy time.
Yes, not imagining that any of us will run out of problems to solve anytime soon.
Yeah, nice. Well, look, we've got a few minutes. We'd start a little bit late actually, but we've got a bit of time before our next session. So, probably just if there were any audience questions, you're more than welcome to put your hand up. There's a man down there. We'll take a few. Probably just see how we go. Our man at the back.
Hi, so you're all working for global companies with users all over the world, but you have a unique perspective of being in New Zealand. And the fact that we're weird and in a small part of the
I didn't say weird, I said small, but I would not disagree with you.
Paraphrasing is all wrong. I'm curious if you're noticing any kind of missed opportunity that Kiwis have, whether it's the music scene in New Zealand, whether it's technology, whether it's, like, is there a missed opportunity that we're missing right now that we could have in the more global scene? And if you can't think of anything, would you recommend that as a community, a music community, a technology community, that we go and explore to try to have a bigger splash in the pond?
I think scarcity is the big one for me. There's not every single synthesizer on the shelf here. You can't go and demo certain speakers. There's a lot of that. So you end up having to make informed decisions or just make really massive mistakes. And I mean, my first drum machine was a TR-606 from Roland, and my first synthesizer was a Korg. And they couldn't communicate together. I had to figure out how to connect MIDI and DIN together and work all of that out. So I think there's opportunities because as resources in the world get scarcer, that is going to become more common overseas as well. So during the pandemic, you've seen scarcity happening even in the heart of America. So I think with that in mind, we've probably got opportunities there we can sort of use to sort of limit the impact that those scarcity models will have on product design.
I guess the missed opportunity or the perspective that I find unique amongst New Zealanders is that so firstly, 20 years ago, the idea that there was a music tech industry wasn't a thing. And so it's kind of been cool to start at Serato, which is 20 people, and now it's an industry, and we've got lights and a stage and microphones and stuff. It's pretty cool. But we've built a lot of people with a lot of really transferable worldwide skills, which is very cool. I think the unique perspective in general that I take from Kiwis, both in the industry but just in general, is that we're often generalists. So a lot of people will look at a problem and be like, that's not my problem to solve, or that, I'm an engineer, that's not an engineering problem, I don't want to deal with that, or I'm a designer, that's not a design problem, I'm not going to do that. As opposed to a lot of people, in my experience and myself, it's like, you're quite a generalist. You're like, oh yeah, I'll give it a go. I don't actually know what it involves or how to do it, but I'll figure it out. And so that I think is quite a unique perspective when solving hard problems. So I expect that, and especially now that telepresence is in Zoom calls is a thing that you can actually meaningfully do. I think the opportunity that I would see is that there's a lot of opportunity for smart people with skills that can solve hard problems in creative ways. That is the thing that we can foster that and make sure that those people can shine on the global stage or even contribute from here to things happening globally now that travel is less of a restriction. Like when I was in, punk bands and stuff, and you're like, oh, we would like to tour Australia. It will cost us $1 zillion to fly there. And I guess the same used to be a bit true with technology. It's like, oh, we want to work with a company in Japan. Well, we have to wait till the company's got enough money that we can all go and talk to them. And now that's different. That landscape has changed. And I think that brings a great deal of opportunity.
Yeah, nice. So that's a great question. Thank you. I think we've probably got time for one more question. Sorry, on that in front here. Yeah.
Kia ora, thank you. My name's Chris. I'm a DJ on Bass FM, also a student at SAE, so I do a bit of music production both with Serato, Ableton. I'm also an environmental engineer, so really interested in sustainability, and I find myself a lot of the times, especially when I'm dealing with so many cables and things and technology, I'm just like, man, there's so much kind of cables and junk. And I'm curious into what extent product development and sustainability is being looked at in terms of climate. I know this is not really maybe the theme of this topic, but Matt, you've already mentioned kind of chip shortages and resource shortages and things like that. So I'm kind of interested how much that's influencing decisions around product development.
Massively. There's no one in this room that enjoys a cable, I think.
I just bought some cables before I came.
How are they going for you?
I haven't tried them yet.
Yeah, I mean, it's a problem. Packaging, all the deliveries for our office came to my house, and I put all the boxes in my garage, and I cleaned them up the other day, and it was disgusting, the amount of packaging that was. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunities there. It's hard when the margins are quite thin to sort of make those calls, but we're actively looking at new technologies that can help us achieve better results for the environment, but also just the bottom line. If you don't have to ship a cable, then that's just one part that you don't have to pass on to the user. So, they're there. It's just, I think they're quite industry-wide problems. You're looking at similar things with battery technologies and stuff, and they're coming along all the time. It's sort of a matter of where their sort of price point hits and whether it's relevant for the product itself. But we're sort of building products with batteries inside them, and those are the kind of things that we're looking at. But again, that's adding to the problem rather than taking away from the problem. So adding a lithium battery into a product doesn't make the world a better place. So I think it's just a matter of trying to reduce the amount of stuff that you don't need. So cables is a great opportunity. A lot of lighting companies now using sort of wireless technology to communicate. There's a lot of barriers with audio. Audio needs to be low latency, so it's really hard to communicate certain amounts of data over the air. So there's some of these problems that we're looking at, quite detailed, but they'll take a little bit of time to sort of resolve, but we're definitely on top of that. So.
The thing, I guess, Ableton puts quite a lot of thought and effort into this. So we're carbon neutral, have been for the last 2 or 3 years, I think, something like that, even though we produce hardware, which by nature is a challenging thing to do from an environmental perspective to do it in a sustainable way. One of the big things is making stuff that lasts a long time or has a long lifespan. If you have to buy a new one every other year, I've got cables that are 20 years old, mostly because I'm a hoarder, but they still work. And if you can make stuff last and not have the churn of new things all the time, and make the thing that you already have last longer, then you have a significant impact on reducing your environmental footprint. So for us, Ableton explicitly chooses to make few things and to try and make them last as long as we can. Push 2 has been out since, I actually can't remember, 2015 or something, I think. So for a music product, that's a long time. And that's on purpose, because if we made another one, then every time you make a new one, you sort of create waste, basically. And so that's pretty deliberate. We've also we did a trade-in program for the previous model so that you could trade that in, and then we would give that to schools and stuff in lower socioeconomic areas. So we would give people a discount, donate the units into education, and as a way of sort of giving everything a longer life as well. So I would say lifespan is one of the most important things, and not, I guess that's as a consumer and as a builder of things, right? I don't know if that answers the question, but
that's a real consumerist trend, right? With always getting upgraded, new iPhones, new controllers, new whatever. It's a difficult trend, right? It's interesting to see.
The scarcity thing that Matt was talking about is super important as well. One of our challenges is being able to make the product for that long is hard, because people aren't used to electronic products being made over a long period of time. So a chip that we use everywhere in Push has gone from, it was like 20 cents a chip or something, and over the supply shortage it's gone at times up to $40 a unit for that one chip and stuff, because it's old. It's like the whole electronics industry is not particularly geared to making things over super long timescales. So it can be challenging to keep something in production for a long period of time.
Awesome.